Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Easton, president of the Claire Booth Luce Center for Conservative Women. Thank you all for coming today and welcome to our June CWN, Conservative Women's Network. Special thank you to Bridget Wagner and the Heritage Foundation. We've been doing these monthly lunches now for 20 years and it's great every time. I'm pleased to introduce our June CWN speaker, Lindsay Craig. Lindsay is the president of the National Review Institute, NRI, the nonprofit that William F. Buckley founded in 1991 to complement the efforts of National Review magazine and promote the ideals of a free society that he championed. Under Lindsay's leadership, NRI has established sound fiscal footing even as it has become the parent company for National Review Inc. She has expanded and enhanced its existing programs while establishing new ones, broadened its partnerships with policy organizations and policymakers across the country. And she remains active in the broader conservative movement, organizing events, serving on advisory boards, and speaking. And I was able to attend one of her events not too long ago, and I was going to give her full credit for it, but she said, no, give it to Alexandra. Where's Alexandra? It was a dinner honoring the Heritage Foundation's founder and former president, Ed Fulner, and also honoring Karen Wright, a friend to many in the conservative movement. The dinner was held in an extraordinarily beautiful building in Chicago. It was a former public library that Ed Fulner had actually gone to as a child, and it was restored about 10 years ago. It's now called a cultural center, and it has the most incredible Tiffany, the largest in the world, Tiffany stained glass domes, marble, brass, mosaics, a building that just takes your breath away. And it was a great event, and the building itself was just incredible. Now, Lindsay joined the National Review Institute 6 years ago, and prior to that, she spent 16 years at the Manhattan Institute for Public Policy, another leading domestic policy think tank. As Vice President of Communications and Marketing at Manhattan, she oversaw the development of the Public Relations Department, social media and web development, and strategic marketing. In addition to her communication department duties, she spearheaded numerous other key Manhattan Institute projects like launching the Young Leaders Circle, organizing major programs, and overseeing their internship program. I know we have a lot of interns here today. She's a Connecticut native, but she's lived in New York City for over 25 years since moving there to study photography and graphic design at the School of Visual Arts with a focus on political art. She graduated from New York University with a BA in politics, and she lives in Brooklyn with her husband and daughter, but she's going to move soon, move up a little, up north. Now, since I'm one of the only people in this room old enough to have known William F. Buckley Jr. in the 1960s and 1970s, I hope you'll allow me to make a few personal comments about this extraordinary man. In addition to founding National Review in 1955, in 1960, Bill Buckley was a founder of Young Americans for Freedom. I was in high school and college in the 1960s, and Bill Buckley's influence and YAF is how I and many other older conservatives became conservative activists. The founding YAF statement was called the Sharon Statement, not after a young woman named Sharon, but because it was written at the Buckley home in Sharon, Connecticut. There were only 3 national organizations for young people on our side in the 1960s, Young Americans for Freedom, ISI, and Young Republicans. And in New York, where I grew up, Young Republic was very liberal, run by Rockefeller Republicans, what we would now call rhinos. So Young Americans for Freedom is now merged into Young America's Foundation, which has its headquarters here in DC and has its West Coast office at Ronald Reagan's beloved Santa Barbara Ranch, which Yaf purchased and saved for all of us. In the 1960s, and really until the day he died, Bill Buckley was willing to help YAF, speaking at almost every major conference we ever had. My first 5 years after college, I was on the national staff of Young Americans for Freedom. And I loved how Bill appreciated the importance of training up the next generation of conservative leaders, something Lindsay carries on now. Remember, back then, what I call the olden days, we had no internet, we had no Fox, we had no cable. We had a couple of good conservative national talk radio programs, if you could tune them in. And there were only two conservative national publications, Buckley's National Review and Human Events newspaper. There was one conservative program on television. Could you imagine that? All my growing up years. And it was William F. Buckley's Firing Line TV program. And my whole family would gather every week around the little television to watch it together. And I have to say that Bill was close to and very fond of Clare Boothe Luce, after whom we named the Center for Conservative Women. They have some great firing line discussions that you can find online if you'd like. And I want to tell you, he wrote so many books. When I read his nonfiction books, I would have a yellow pad with me and end up with pages and pages of words he used whose meaning I didn't know. Big, good words. I mean, a vocabulary lesson like nothing you ever get in school. And my husband used to give me one of Buckley's fiction books every year at Christmas. They were quick reading, little entertaining books about Blackford Oaks. He was a CIA agent, he was a spy, and he was the lead character in these neat little fun fiction books. I had lunch with Bill Buckley after I'd served 8 years with President Reagan. And I had wanted to write a book about those years. And I thought, well, he's written so many books. So I asked him for his advice about writing. His books were so wonderful. And he looked me in the eye and said, Michelle, you sit down and start writing. What a great man. What a great American. He was right. Just start. What a huge influence William F. Buckley Jr. was in my life and that of so many conservatives of the time, and even today. And Lindsay Craig does more to keep this important legacy alive than any other person. Please join me now in welcoming from the National Review Institute, Lindsay Craig.
Thank you. That was very nice, very incredibly generous, and I would say that the two of you, these wonderful women here, probably do more to carry on the legacy and support the conservative movement, right? Anyway, thank you all for having me. Thank you so much, Michelle. I really am so excited. Obviously, our organizations and YAF have had such a close relationship over the years that it's really fun. You come to our events, and now I get to come to your event, so that's good. So I wanted to start it off by asking all of you, we've got some microphones here, because we're not going to just talk at you. We want to make this a little bit conversational. So who here knows who Bill Buckley is? Don't worry, we won't immediately call on you, but okay. So there's some people here who don't know who he is, yes? Okay. Now, for maybe just a couple of you can tell us when you first encountered Bill Buckley. We have a microphone here. And maybe like 2 or 3 things that you would say are items or attributes that you associate with Bill Buckley. Don't be shy. Some of you, oh, there we go. I see hands.
I also came across Bill Buckley for the first time with my Young Americans for Freedom chapter. I mean, similarly, I would say he's really insightful and really inspiring, and just to his dedication to the conservative movement.
What would be a few issues that you would associate with him? Things that you thought he championed? If you don't know, it's okay. That's part of what I want to.
He championed a lot, but I would say, I mean, major one, just like overcoming leftism and that as a movement in general.
Yeah, good. Okay, good. Somebody else? Raise your hand over here, I think. Right here? Yeah.
Thank you. I also was very actively involved in Young America's Foundation all throughout high school and a little bit into college. And I would say just his dedication to smart, transcendent principles of conservatism is what I often think of him. And I also always remember his book, God, Man, and Yale, and his story of conversion.
Great. Anyone over here? Want to give like a couple issues that you associate with Bill Buckley? No? Okay. So I think it's super interesting. It has been for me in taking this job. So I was born in 1972, and I definitely was a Reagan kid, right? So Reagan became president when I was in 2nd grade. And that sort of informs your whole life, right? And so for us at the time, Reagan had such a big influence on the way you talked about politics, that for a young child, you really saw that. It was everywhere. But actually what was everywhere before that, and the reason why we could have Reagan, is because of Bill Buckley. And I only learned that later. So one of the things that I wanted to sort of go back to the beginning and go over, and then we can have more of a conversation. I don't want to talk at you for too long, is what are the things about Bill Buckley, who was this really huge historical figure who had so much influence over political writing, over political philosophy, about the way that we message things, over the actual politicians, whether it be Barry Goldwater or Ronald Reagan and others, on his faith, in writing novels, in being a sailor. He was quite a polymath, so there's lots of different ways of looking at him. But I think that, to me, there's sort of three main areas or legacy issues that I think that we can kind of hold on to and see how they might influence your life, your professional life, and your personal life going forward. They have for me. So the first one for me is bringing people together. This is a sort of like a lost art. I think that the Heritage Foundation does a great job of this, and thank God they're a beacon for this. The other is civil debate, the idea of actually debating and then being able to be friends afterwards. We might have lost a little bit of this right now, but we can get it back. So that's another one. And also the importance of culture. Right? We're all working in a political field right now, but culture was very important to Bill Buckley, and I'll explain a little bit about what he did. So going back to the bringing people together part, so I brought some replica copies for everybody. This is the premier issue of National Review. And as some of you know, Jack Fowler, this is the kind of thing that he does, very important. Make some replicas so that people can see everything that was in the original issue of National Review that came out in November 19th, 1955. So I'm going to name off some names here. Hopefully some of them ring a bell. But after Bill wrote God and Man at Yale, and it made such a big stir, he kind of rose to real prominence. And there was maybe 3 factions at the time in the 50s. Now remember, this is a post-World War II era, okay? So the context is different than today. But the 3 were really on the right, the anti-communists, which were strong and had a lot of strange bedfellows who weren't really friends necessarily before that, the libertarians, and sort of the strong sort of social conservatives. And so when Bill started National Review, he wanted to pull them all together. So here we have people that appeared in this premier issue that had to be convinced by Bill because they did not talk to each other. Frank Meyer, does his name ring a bell? Great libertarian, strong libertarian. James Burnham, more of a sort of cultural traditional conservative, like Russell Kirk, who also appears in here. John Chamberlain, Wilmer Kendall, Freda Utley, who was a strong anti-communist because she had lived in the Soviet Union and decided that that system didn't really work. And so what's interesting to me is that here it is in the premier issue, and that still continues today in the pages of National Review and now online. This was not such an easy task, as I understand it. And I think that some great explanation of this is in Lee Edwards' book. I've got lots of props for you all today. You all should get this book and read it. I don't know if you give it out to your people, but Lee Edwards, who's here at the Heritage Foundation, who is a scholar of conservative thought, this book is a fantastic read. As you can see, it's not like a huge tome. You can definitely get through it. But it explains how Bill sort of shuttled between Frank Meyer and James Burnham in particular to get them to appreciate that other people were appreciating and respecting their work. They did not talk to each other, but Bill would write them little notes to James Burnham saying, Frank thought you wrote this fabulous piece in the last issue, and he would do the same to Frank, and then they continued to appear on the pages together. And Russell Kirk, who also thought that there was no reason to really appear in such a publication, decided after much convincing, and this was after he had written The Conservative Mind, that it would be okay if he could write a regular column in National Review. So this kind of bringing people together was an important aspect of Bill Buckley's personality, but also his goal in creating in the conservative movement disparate voices, but that really actually we're all on the same page. That they might have some things that were different, that they didn't have to agree 100% with the other person, but they agreed enough that they felt like they were on the same side. And when you have the sort of like a big looming threat like communism, that was advantageous for Bill to be able to get everybody on the same page. We do live in a different context today. And I think that it's important to understand that one of the ways that he was very successful in getting everybody to work together was using this communist threat as a uniter. But we can find other ways, I think, to do that today. You might have heard the word fusionism before. Bill was very well known for wanting to particularly bring together the traditionalists and the libertarians. And also, I wanted to just read, I have to put on my glasses because, like I said, I was born in '72. Okay, so in the premier issue here, they have the tenets, sorry, of the publication and what they're. Will you do me a favor, Alex? Will you find that? I have it. I had the post-it on it and it came off, so I'm sorry. So he wanted to found the magazine that had both looking at the traditional conservative position and the libertarian limited government position. Before he started National Review, he called himself an individualist, and then he called himself a libertarian. He was very influenced by Albert J. Nock, who was a good friend of his father's, who I don't think they were exactly ideologically aligned always, but Albert Nock came to their house quite a bit, and they had family dinners, which I think his father did rather regularly. Being in such a prominent family, they were able to kind of bring prominent public intellectual thinkers to their family, which had 10 kids. So it must have been quite a fabulous dining room table. So the other is rising to the challenge of debating people on the other side in a civil way, and sort of being able to hold your ground, but being able to understand who the best opponent is on the other side. As Michelle mentioned, he started a show called Firing Line in 1966. It ran all the way until 1999. Thank you. And there was like 1,500 episodes almost. And on the TV show, which I really recommend that you all watch, and actually we find a lot of young people probably do. How many people have watched Firing Line online? Yeah, a few. Okay, so the rest of you, that can be part of your homework after you read Lee Edwards' book. And on Firing Line, the point there was to bring on people and have an actual civil discussion where you engaged in real issues for an hour. Now, this was something that, with only 3 TV channels basically at the time, maybe 4 with PBS, you had the opportunity to do. It was a weekend program. And so there wasn't a lot of, like TV shows or breaking news. And so they were able to provide an opportunity for this TV show. And Bill got all the funding for it. And so obviously then the shows are kind of ready-made for TV. So Bill brought on people who were like Hugh Hefner. One of my favorite sort of clips from that is Hugh Hefner is going off about how monogamy is not really human nature, and that we don't really, it's like an odd social construct, and he's going on and on saying all these negative things, and you can just see Bill Buckley getting a little like super agitated. And then he finally says, "Excuse me, but how the hell would you know?" And you're like, okay. But then they continued and had a very good conversation. And I think the important point of that is that you can bring on somebody who is really the best representative of this other point of view and engage and be able to kind of noodle out what the discussion is, right? But he would also have on people who he mostly agreed with. So it was like Claire Booth Lewis, and as Michelle was saying, they did have a little bit of a disagreement on there. Bill had said some things about women that Claire, I think, did not like, which is also great. He had Margaret Thatcher on several times, and they had an excellent conversation about the role of government and how much the government should be involved, particularly in economic policy. And it's a very interesting conversation, so I encourage you to look at that one. But a lot of different people on the left wanted to then come on the show because I think that they felt as though Bill respected them, right? And I think that this is a really important legacy issue that we can take on today. I think when the other side doesn't feel like that you respect them, they're not really going to respect you, right? And if we want people to respect our ideas, to listen to them, that we think that we're good advocates for our position, then we should respect their perspective. We don't agree with it, we're not going to advocate for it, but we want them to be heard just like we want to be heard. And I think that in this age, unfortunately, of sort of rapid reaction, of Twitter, of wanting to denounce people before maybe you've even heard the whole argument, or reacting to something before you've read the whole article, like maybe the context of it, I think it really hurts our side in us being able to make our strongest arguments and defend our issues. So I think that that's sort of a very important legacy that Bill had that I think we can still work on today. And then lastly is culture. Bill Buckley founded a magazine of politics and culture. And if you look in here, which I want you all to do, there's a section called Books, Arts, and Manners. So it comes like this in the premier issue. And today, we have the same thing, Books, Arts, and Manners. And on the online, we have a much larger section, which now includes film and TV reviews, art reviews regularly, and this section is sponsored by National Review Institute now. And it's interesting because I think that when Bill founded the magazine, he was encouraged in the political space to put out a publication that would have political philosophy in it and discuss policy issues of the day. But he felt that it was also very important for there to be a mix of culture because we're not just political beings, right? The context that we exist in is our culture. And so if we want to engage in a discussion about music or literature or art, there's a political aspect to that. And as Michelle mentioned, I studied a lot of political art. Actually, all art is political if you look at it in a certain way. But you're trying to communicate something through visual art, and you're trying to communicate something through music. And so Bill felt that this was an important equalizer, right? This is another way that you can bring people together, which was the first point that I talked about, right? We can all talk about Bach, and we can all feel what it feels like to listen to the Brandenburg Concerto. And that has nothing to do with whether we think that Social Security should be distributed in a certain way or not, or whether we should build a wall. And so this is actually a fabulous mechanism that Bill used to bring in the other side. He would regularly have concerts at his home where he would have lots of people that he didn't agree with. His best friend was somebody that he didn't agree with on political issues. But they could sail together, and they could ski together, and they could listen to music together. And that is super important, and I think doesn't happen enough today. One of us actually having friends on the other side, which I think is something that we all really need to work on, because sometimes it's very hard. But the other is to be really involved in the arts. And Bill and his wife, Pat, were very, very involved in the arts. Because they think that culture matters. And this building that we had the prize dinner in, where we honored Ed Fulner, is actually a great example of public art, essentially. This was a public library when it was first built, so that for the benefit of all the people, right? And so, again, this is a way that we feel that like our culture represents who we are, and can highlight and put a priority on the things that we think are important. So I would just encourage you all to think about the cultural issues and to think about ways that you can use non-political issues to be able to engage and bring people together. So I want to open it up for questions, and I can talk about a lot of different aspects of the Buckley Legacy, but I think if we kind of try to keep it to these three issues, I would love to know how you all think about any of these three issues. What do you think about civil debate? Do you think that there's enough of it? What do you think about Twitter? How do you think that or Facebook conversations? And what do you think about culture? Are any of you involved in groups that might be more sort of cultural or art-oriented, where you're able to engage with people, not about politics, but about the other things that we think are important? So with that, I want to open it up for some commentary from all of you. Yes, right here.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking. That was. Oh, my name is Ellie Hicks. I'm a fellow with Claire Booth Luce.
Great.
And it's really great. I just wanted to say that I think it's really important to be involved in the arts. I did theater for so many years growing up. I still, enjoy singing, and I still enjoy going to shows. And through theater, I gained a lot of friends who I disagreed with a lot. My best friend is kind of socialist, kind of freaks me out, but I also love her so much. But yeah, so I just wanted to say that if you're interested in any kind of art, like everybody here, just do it, because it really is. I have some of the best friends ever that I completely disagree with.
I think it's such a good point, because you have an opportunity to share something that you share something in common with a group of people that, whatever your politics are irrelevant when you walk into the door there. It is still who you are, and so it's not about not making it who you are. It's just about understanding where you have common ground with other people, because then, like your friend, you guys will engage over time, over dinner or whatever. You'll talk about various things. Obviously, you know what her views are if you think that she's a socialist. And then maybe over time you can have a conversation. She can see your point of view, and that's a good thing. Others? Yep.
Hi, so I was wondering, how did William F. Buckley jump into art and culture without falling to the lowest common denominator of sports, movies, and music while still engaging the public's attention?
So Rich Lowry likes to say that, so Rich Lowry, who's the current editor-in-chief of National Review, is a big Yankee fan. I mean, like sports statistics and history and everything, he knows it all. And he always says that somebody asked Bill one time if he wanted to go to a Yankee game, and he said, "No, I've been to one." And so he just wasn't a sports fan. He sailed, but he just wasn't. But he did play the harpsichord. So he was very, music was very much a part of his household when he was growing up. And he played an instrument. I think his siblings played instruments. So I think that from his perspective, it was more probably the high arts than sports and such. But I do also want to mention, though, because you mentioned this, you saw recently, I think, that ESPN decided that they're not going to do anything, political, right? And I know that some of the folks on the editorial staff at National Review right now are really interested in sports. David French talks a lot about basketball, and I don't know what else he follows. And so they were thinking of having a sports section on National Review. So it would be like a place where, again, it could be a wonderful convener opportunity where you would have people who might come for the sports coverage, whether they're conservatives or not, and maybe they'll read some of the other pieces. But it's also a great way for some of the National Review writers who don't agree, which is, again, always been part of the magazine, that you don't have people who are 100% agreeing on everything, to be able to talk about something else. They can argue about whatever their home state baseball team is. Anyone else? What do you guys think? Go ahead.
I am one of our interns here, and I'm working partially with outreach, and so I agree with Bill, and I actually think that we should take the culture, that seam, and rip it open, and especially when you're reaching out to youth. A 15-year-old kid isn't really interested in tax policy, but they are interested in culture, and so I think that is actually how you message to them, and then in that, you can kind of, on the caboose, bring in education, morally, politically, that's conservative, but I think you meet them with culture, because that's what their eyes go to, you know what I mean? So it's really cool that he did that, but I think you could do both. I think you could do sports, media, and fine arts. Why not all, right? Why limit it? So you'll get more people that way. So it's a cool thing. I think there's a lot of desire there right now. And you're seeing like National Review wants to get into it, Turning Point's trying to address it, Heritage even has a desire. So it'll be cool to see like that need met in the next 10 years or so.
You mentioned about culture, and you can you were gonna get the microphone away from your friend there. I saw that you were.
Sorry.
We were actually just having some meetings about sort of the social media space and the issue of free speech. And this is a way, I think, of also being able to speak to people, probably young people, more so than older people. Like, I'm not even actually on Facebook. So if you talk to them about an issue that they see as like a cultural issue, or one that is interesting to them because it affects so much of their life, but you can be able to interject issues of free speech and freedom of expression after having the initial conversation, about what's on Facebook and should it be regulated or whatever.
I just had a quick question along the same lines of culture. I don't know much about Bill, like at all, but I wondered if he had any.
You can read this book.
I plan on it. That looks good. Did he say anything specifically about the tie between culture and morality, as opposed to culture and politics? Because what I see is sort of the issue with culture nowadays, and just as a religious person, it seems inextricably tied to immorality. And I don't know, like, how you talk about like the fine arts, and he played the harpsichord and things, and when I think of culture nowadays, it's just so far removed from things like that. Not that those things are inherently moral, but so much of our culture as kids would think of it today has to do with just terrible music and like awful themes and terrible language, and so I wondered if he had anything to say about that, the denigration of culture as it pertains to morality, and maybe what we can do culturally about that.
So he was very much a man of faith, and he was not. I want to say he was not shy about it. In other words, like, it permeated all of his writing. He was not an evangelist, but he definitely wove it into his writings, and he had a lot of cultural critique as well. I'm not sure, though, that he would use the word immoral, except for in very specific situations. Remember, he did appear in the pages of Playboy, which some people would consider, sort of like accepted pornography, right? Which would then mean some people would think it's immoral. And that's a judgment call. But I mean, he sort of jokes about it because he says, like, this is how he was able to reach his son, Christopher. I published in in Playboy so that I could reach my son, Christopher. Which is probably, there's sort of probably some like sort of half truth to that. That's sort of funny. But I think that his main point there was like, you go to where the people are reading, right? And he didn't have a problem with that. He thought it was important that you reach people in all the ways that you can. So he spent a tremendous amount of time speaking on college campuses. Obviously, he published National Review. He had a tremendous number of books, more than like normal people could ever produce, that both were novels that had specific themes to them, as well as obviously his policy books. Like I said, Firing Line, he did a lot of debates, a lot of speaking, a lot of engagement with people in different ways so that he could reach the maximum audience. And I think that in his cultural critique, I think that the way that he wanted to put that forward, and I don't want to speak for him, and I'm not a Buckley scholar. Again, you should visit Lee Edwards upstairs. What's fascinating to me about the pages of National Review, historically, but then also today, is that people's faith is referenced and mentioned as how they got to their perspective on things, and it's very common in almost, I would say, probably half of the articles that appear in National Review right now will have some reference at some point to either the broader culture and faith or the writer's perspective on that. And I think that that's the way you can kind of weave it in without being even evangelizing about it or being judgmental about it. So other people I wanted to ask about civil debate. There's a lot of debate right now, right? What do you all think about that?
Hi, so I write for the Christian Post and CBN News, and doing social media production for them, I see a lot of, someone will have a position and they'll deliver it civilly. It'll certainly be a disagreement with the main narrative, but dissent has been equated or associated with hate. How do you navigate that conversation? It's like I being whoever it is online saying, I'm disagreeing, but I don't hate you, I don't think ill of you, I don't wish harm on you, but yada yada. And then they'll say, oh, you're still hateful because, you know, fill in the ridiculous straw man variable. So what do we do? What do we do in that situation?
So I would like to know if somebody here has an answer to that. Yep.
Hi, my name is Catherine Woodhouse. So having graduated from Hillary Clinton's alma mater and sitting here today, I know a little bit about that. Going to Wellesley College was a wonderful experience for me in the kind of political climate that I was able to be there with, especially as someone who is politically not let's just say the ideals that Wellesley necessarily espouses, or some of the students within Wellesley espouses. I would say for lots of institutions, especially collegiate institutions, they go even a step further than just saying, oh, you're hateful. They actually create an environment where if you disagree with them, you are a racist, you are homophobic, you are a bigot, because you stand against their marginalized label, their whatever they create. And so it's a new kind of argument, and it's a new kind of rhetoric these days, where instead of attacking the opinion, or not even attacking, instead of discussing an opinion, it's seen as attacking the person themselves. So it completely delegitimizes the other person's argument. So at Wellesley, I was a part of an organization called the Freedom Project, which tried to bring in speakers of different political beliefs to have different discussions. It was interesting, needless to say. We had lots of protests. We had, and it was met with mixed reviews. Now we have a task force of free speech, which I think is kind of ironic. But that was put forth by administration as a response to the Freedom Project. So I say that to give a lot of context to this answer, which is people need to put their labels aside and discuss the topic. And so when it comes to actually being able to sit down and have a discussion, I think everything else should go by the wayside, all the context, all the hypotheticals, and it should be the debate and the discussion itself. And I think to set up a forum where that is encouraged is definitely the first step.
Yeah, that's a great project that you were involved in, and I think that what I had mentioned earlier about one of the second thing that I mentioned in terms of being, I think, one of the great takeaways that we can have, that we can learn from Bill Buckley and his style, is that he did not respond directly to the negative with another negative, and trying to find representatives of the other side who are the best at arguing their side. Rising to that challenge is how we can make our best arguments, right? And so finding the best people who represent the other side is sometimes a little bit challenging in and of itself. But one of the things that we found is that if you're inviting people, again, with respect, as Bill Buckley did, or when he would invite people who disagree to appear in the pages of National Review, that you start out with this, with respect, and try to elicit as much of it back as possible. It's not going to always work, and I think that the context that we're working in right now is that people, particularly on the other side, immediately devolve to these labels, which are like throwing gasoline on a fire, because as soon as you use those labels, it ends all of the discussion. And I think we can't let them do that. I think that we can say, okay, we put that to the side, and now let's talk about the issue. It's what Bill did, and I think that that's one of the things that I would argue that, or advocate for all of you to take with you. And by the way, I'd also say that in response to what you were saying is, so there was like tremendous amount of mail that came into National Review over the years, and obviously still does. And some of it is really fabulous and like super supportive of various things. And then there's sort of a cohort in the middle that people just want you to like argue about something, and you sort of forgot this nuanced thing or whatever. And then there's like a whole category of stuff that's, especially stuff that comes in now that's like really like, wow, maybe we should hand this over to the police. But just like the language that people use is pretty overblown. But I think that Bill was also well known for responding to readers. All of them, you might get like a one line letter back. But National Review published a letter section where they would have responses. But also Bill Buckley, you can look in the pages, Bill and other writers would write responses. So sometimes, particularly this is like in an era where, National Review would come out and it would be mailed to people's homes, and then somebody would write a response and it would appear in like the New Republic, and then you would respond, and it would be, this go on for months. But I also think that allowed for a little bit of a settling down, and it wasn't like quite as emotional as things get right now. And since Bill Buckley was such a level-headed person, I think that this worked to his advantage in being able to respond to important critiques. We have a whole, in our office now, we have a new sort of museum-ish kind of thing. We have some display cases of Buckley memorabilia, and we have one whole case on his faith. But there was a lot of conversation and criticism of his faith at a certain time in the 70s, and he, I think, reacted and then had to react again in writing in a more level-headed way. And it was very important to him that he got his actual message out on this. And I think I mentioned that because I think that we're also all human, right? And I think that that's a really important backdrop, context. So you're going to have emotions and when people call you names, but we can rise above it. And I think that that's like the best thing that we can do as conservatives. We can be confident that you have a network of people here who have your back. And it's not about always being like first in your response, but being right and respectful. And I think that that's a good legacy from Bill. Are there any others? I know we're running on time. Are we good?
One hand in the back.
Oh, wait.
Did you have anything? No?
I've got a question. If you can share with everyone, some are still on campus, Some
Yeah.
are have already graduated and they're in their first jobs. So, how would a student get a National Review speaker on campus? And then, what are the fellowship programs National Review might have, or what relationships do you have with some programs that are on campus?
Yeah, well, Alex got a shout out earlier, so now Claire can get one. This is Claire Ath, who works for National Review Institute here in DC. She runs NRI on campus. She oversees our intern program and also our fellowship program. So I'll just briefly overview what we try to do, again, sort of in the Buckley legacy, since he spent so much time on college campuses, is bring National Review writers to college campuses. And one of the main ways that we like to do that, though, is to partner with groups who are established on campuses already. So we're not just going to like arrive at like the University of Wisconsin and hope that people show up. We think that there are fabulous networks. We work with ISI and we work with YAF and we work with the AEI program and some others. So if you are on campus and you're involved in a group that regularly hosts speakers, you can get an audience, you should write to Claire. And Claire will start a conversation with you and find out a little bit more about how we can make that work. One of the things that we do with our program, which I think is important, is, and we do this with our partnership programs also, is we pay for the travel for the speaker and somebody like Claire or another member of our team to go and to help on the ground when we arrive. But it's up to the host group to kind of fill the room and make sure the logistics are sort of all operational for the speaker. And we want to make it as efficient as possible for our writers to arrive on campus and to spend time with the students. If there's a student newspaper that they can talk to, we're really interested in that because we think that that helps to sort of, again, broaden the audience of people who might hear the ideas that they have. And then if there's any other kinds of groups that, or like maybe sometimes there's a small group of people who are really interested in journalism. So sometimes what we've been doing is having like a larger forum, and then afterwards we have, pizza with like, 8 students who are actually really interested in learning about journalism and sort of more of a one-on-one type thing. But definitely get in touch with Claire about that. And the fellowships, so National Review Institute sponsors 3 fellowships right now. 2 are Buckley Journalism Fellows, which are students who have just graduated from college. It's a 1-year grant to work for National Review. And it can be in kind of any area. The National Review editors choose the candidate, and it's based on who they kind of need in the portfolio of writers that they have at that given time. So if they have a lot of reporters and they need sort of more editorial writers, then they'll pick somebody who is stronger in that area. So there's no sort of like one thing. So there's 2, and that's renewable to another year. So sometimes they're there for 2 years. And then we sponsor a Rhodes Fellow, and this is named after Dusty Rhodes, who was a former president of National Review, Inc., who had been a long-time sort of philanthropist and involved with conservative groups for a long time. He was a fabulous person, well-known throughout the movement, as just a delight. And he passed away about a year ago, and we, with his wife and with the support of the Bradley Foundation, have a fellowship which is actually different in its structure. It's somebody who's maybe 5 years out of school, has some work experience, has established themselves as a journalist, and would like to spend probably 2 to 3 years then at National Review. This would be a little bit more like second job kind of thing. So. And right now we have one of our journalism fellows graduated to be the Rhodes Fellow. So we were really excited about that. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Okay. Thank you all.
What a wonderful talk. Thank you. A great talk about an extraordinary man. Thank you so much for coming and sharing. We have a couple of gifts here for you.
Oh, gosh.
Mrs. Lewis's favorite flower was a red rose. In fact, she used to wear it in a little vase on her lapel, but those are hard to find. So there you go.
Thank you so much. You're so sweet.
Some Claire Booth Lewis flowers.
That's very sweet. That's sweet.
We have a gift here from the Heritage Foundation also,
Oh my
one of
gosh.
our kind of monogram signature items to share with you to
Oh, thank
take
you.
back to New York. We want to thank you all for joining us and thank those who are going to be watching online.